Welcome to Bible/Chat, chatting about the Bible, but in this case, not so much about the Bible. Sorry.
No.
Not so much about the Bible. Yeah, church history. So we talked last time about the SPC and what's currently happening denominationally there. Some fracturing beginning to show, and probably some splits that will be impending after the election. Although they did choose a moderate candidate, so we'll see what happens. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting time to live in, but in some ways it sort of reflects what's already happened in church history. And you taught a class on church history. I thought it might be helpful.
I did. About denominations
and sort of what happened to denominations in America, maybe, starting 1875 and what took place.
There were obviously a variety of denominations, fewer than there are now, because they all sort of split and had branches and broke off for all sorts of different reasons. But by the time you get to the early 20th century, you have your mainline denominations, whether it's Baptists, Presbyterians, Methodists, Lutherans, Episcopalians, right? But what starts to happen is, and why we have all the glut of denominations that we have now, is because ultimately, I think you tie it back to theological liberalism, and maybe one like main focal point of that would be the social gospel, right? Like Harry Emerson Fosdick. I'm losing names now, amongst others. Union Seminary in New York, who would preach. I mean, it's not a gospel; it's a false gospel. A social gospel, the gospel of, self. And that being tied with like social work, social justice for. In that era, depression, pre-depression, depression, post-depression, for those who are poor and poor, needy and on the outside. And so as the church sort of got, what happened was just over time, I think you could say it's from a variety of influences like Darwinianism, like believing in evolution and that kind of creeping into the church. And also the church over time sort of just not standing firm on the authority of the Bible, inerrancy and inspiration. And some of these key doctrines were like kind of let go of slowly. Not like all at once. Nothing ever happens all at once. It's just slowly, like
the slow lead.
It's authoritative, but it's not inspired. And once you do that, it's not authoritative. It's nothing.
Totally.
So some of these doctrines become sort of really messed with, like virgin birth. I mean, things like that, where you're like, wow, they would actually gut these things or just chuck them out entirely. And what got replaced with more of the supernatural, good old fundamental truths were things like, the self and self-esteem. That's where a lot of that self-empowerment and Robert Schuller, positive thinking, all that actually has a root back then. In theological liberalism, which then forces them, or forces the conservatives in Presbyterian circles, for example, to split away. Because if, you have Presbyterians who are adopting evolutionary theory or theologically liberal stances with certain key doctrines like that, then you have Presbyterians like Machen and their ilk moving out, starting Westminster Seminary. That's how it actually started. Because Princeton Seminary was becoming liberal. And so they're like, wait a minute, we can't abide by this.
We can't stay.
And so they're, some of them, they're effectively cut out. Right? And defrocked. And so they're like, wait a minute, it doesn't matter. You're not a biblical organization anymore.
It's an empty shell that's doing that.
So we're going to create our own. And they created the seminary first, if I'm not mistaken, and the OPC rose out of that. There's a long kind of tangled history there. And other denominations did the same thing, whether it's in the Baptists or other Presbyterian groups. Oftentimes because of theological division, you get all these different groups, all sorts of different Baptists. There's so many, actually. It's just crazy, I don't think any other country has as many. I mean, we have like a rich Christian heritage, but we have so many denominations that it's like
just a chaotic mess.
It's hard to keep track of. But
to keep track of it.
Boil it down, the conservatives left, not really for social reasons per se, but the theological underpinnings of what the mothership was holding on to.
So the liberalism creeps in first through like social gospel and those kinds of things,
or scientific
scientific stuff, which then led to sort of a letting go of the core theologies of the faith, the fundamentals of the faith, so to speak.
That's where fundamentalism, actually that term was birthed. They weren't fundamentalists because they didn't want people to go to movies or drink or
not like the extremism.
No, exactly. actually they were fundamentalists because they held to the what they believed were the biblical fundamentals of the faith.
Yeah.
And that's why they were called fundamentalists. Yeah. And actually, fundamentalists were not just one group, like Baptists only.
Yeah.
But the original fundamentalism was composed of Baptists and Presbyterians and all sorts of different people from different denominations that were conservative theologically, but had different maybe views eschatologically or church polity.
Things, secondary and tertiary.
But they actually believed these fundamentals, and so they wrote those articles and which were compiled in that 10-volume, I think, series, The Fundamentals.
Yeah.
And met together for conferences, did things together. And that's where fundamentalism as a term, as an idea, was birthed. But then that becomes, as with anything else, it became sort of more cultural as opposed to theological. Took on a life of
its own,
Because then it was like, well, not only are we theologically going to separate, but like the separation is going to involve lots of other things like that are just cultural, that are maybe neutral, become more legalistic, like you can't do this, you can't do the outside markers rather than theological ones, biblical ones. So.
Fascinating.
I know that's a lot.
No, that's very interesting. So in some ways it's very similar. I mean, we've had the Together for the Gospel movement from different denominations coming together. And then sort of the social justice, the current social justice stuff, and critical race theory and some of the racism issues that are in the church seem to be the things that are dividing the denominations.
It just seems like it.
Splitting things up.
Yeah, and it's been accelerated. I can't imagine what it must have felt like, in the 20s, 30s, you're a Presbyterian, you're conservative, your denomination is basically going sideways and trying to kick you out, whether directly or by implication. I can't imagine what that must have felt like for some of those guys to,
it must have been very difficult.
Lose their jobs, lose their livelihood, but it seems like we're on the precipice of something. We don't know, but...
Yeah, something similar. It's interesting, too, because the Presbyterians are having similar problems, right?
They are.
I mean, they're even within the PCA, there's now a growing division along some of the social lines.
Yeah, so. Like the others have already gone... Well, PCUSA or certain branches of the Lutheran Church, Anglican Church, they've already gone the way of... And now it's not so much social gospel, but it's the...
LGBTQ gospel,
sexual revolution gospel, if you will. That's sort of undermined, sound biblical teaching in those churches for years.
So basically, 100 years and the exact same thing's happening again.
Yeah, which probably
very similar thing.
It's funny because you didn't have denominations for so long, right? You had one church. Yeah. In fractured, you have two churches in 1054, and then you just had one voice or two, where you lived, and that was it. And now we have these competing marketplace of voices and ideas and churches, and it's part of it is like it's a statement on how the sad state of the church.
Yeah, totally.
And the sad state of theology in the church, because you can have those denominations and that's fine, but then it just inevitably devolves into all this chaos. And I mean, not that you have to be a part of a denomination to go bad, but
But as a general rule,
it's interesting that it's
that tends to be like the anchor that pulls them down.
It does, because they hold so much sway. You have huge numbers of people in churches and pastors and seminaries. And that's where it usually starts. None of these movements were grassroots.
No.
They were all from pastors and theologians. And their views on the Bible taken from certain liberal European critics and whatever. Brought all that in,
and then filtered into the grassroots as opposed to the other way.
And then the people, of course, are going to accept like priests, like people, and they're going to follow along.
Interesting.
So we just need to be careful and watch out, see what's going to happen. We don't know. I wonder what's going to happen with the conservative, like PCA is conservative. Southern Baptists are. You have several different wings there, generally conservative, and there's a group of churches in there that we would endorse and partner with. We'll see what happens with everything going on with not only LGBTQ. Like I said, all gets merged together. The social issues of our day with race,
race,
ethnicity,
complementarianism, LGBTQ.
You have all those social issues.
Yeah,
doesn't look. It looks like a powder keg to me.
Yeah, same. I agree.
So we'll see what happens.
All right. Well, thanks. That's very interesting. That's fascinating. I'm just historically seeing all that unfold again.
It is really fascinating. There's a lot more. So, too many things.
We'll do another one here in just a minute. But thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.